Hi, I'm Jo Wood, Strength and Run Coach with Aspire2. I'm joined today by Duncan Maughan, the CEO of RemoteMed. Hi, Duncan. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'll get you to introduce yourself in a second, but firstly, I just want to establish the topic of today's conversation for some context. So I'm passionate about both road and trail running, but when I'm in a trail running phase, I love nothing more than long mountain runs in remote areas to explore the wild, connect with nature and friends, or simply reconnect with myself. But before heading out though, prior planning is needed. Having the right stuff in your pack and the right knowledge in your head can make the difference between a beautiful run or a disastrous one. For instance, mountain runs can often take longer than expected. The weather can change suddenly and dramatically. You may get hopelessly lost. And if you fall or roll an ankle, it could take many hours for help to reach you. But I don't want to put anyone off. On the contrary, in fact, I'd like to empower runners with the knowledge of what should be considered and why before long training runs or races in remote mountain areas. That way, the great outdoors can be enjoyed responsibly and with the confidence that should things go wrong, runners are equipped with the right gear and the right knowledge to proactively protect themselves and others, minimise any harm that might arise, and avoid potentially life-threatening situations. So Duncan, I'd like to chat to you today about the kinds of trouble trail runners might find themselves in, what they should do in each case, and importantly, how certain situations can be avoided in the first place. Later on, we'll discuss a list of 10 pre-run considerations that we've developed to help trail runners stay safe and maximise the incredible joy of running in wild places. So first, Duncan, please tell us a bit about yourself and your business, RemoteMed.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for the opportunity to join you on this podcast. So yes, I am a critical care nurse with a background in cardiac emergency and intensive care nursing. I've also spent quite a bit of time in remote Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory and just worked in general hospital populations as well. I've also got a background in fire and emergency management, so done quite a bit of emergency management work, and I'm a member and past president of Alpine Search and Rescue in Victoria, and also currently a volunteer ski patroller with the Mount Sterling Ski Patrol. So yep, certainly love being in the outdoors and doing all those things, particularly in the mountains, probably not as fast as you do, but still getting out there and participating in outdoor life. And I've also, apart as a match between the hospital and healthcare environment and enjoying being outside and outdoors, I'm also a wilderness emergency medical technician and qualified in wilderness medicine through courses that I'm a lead instructor here for in Australia that's delivered to an international curriculum. So yeah, I'd really like to combine both the excitement of being outdoors and also the challenge of providing medicine and care in those environments.
And so for anyone who might not know, what does wilderness medicine refer to?
It's there's quite a few definitions, and people have tried to put some boundaries around it, which some haven't stuck. One of the ones that generally sticks is more than an hour from definitive care. Which, when you think about it, could be on the M5 and peak hour, but it's usually also referred to as remote and austere environments. And I guess the hallmarks from medicine in that environment is that you're looking at a resource poor environment, so you don't have all the equipment that you might have, certainly in a hospital setting, but even in, say, a remote clinic setting, the need, therefore, to improvise and to make do with the equipment that you have, extended patient care, and perhaps long periods before you get any outside assistance. So real emphasis on being self-sufficient, trying to make things work with what you've got and to be able to care for somebody for an extended period of time.
Well, it definitely sounds like you're qualified to answer my questions with authority. So let's get into our chat. Thanks.
Sure.
So in ultra running, we use the term fueling to refer to nutrition, hydration, and electrolyte replacement. And we know that fueling hugely impacts running performance. For instance, if fueling isn't dialed in, then athletes fail to meet their training and racing potential. But when might inadequate fueling lead to potentially dangerous situations in terms of runners' health?
And look, I think there's a really important place to start, because if you haven't got those fundamentals of fueling, as you say, dialed in, then you're going to be in a situation coming from behind. And certainly, whilst you might be trying to achieve your athletic goals, that can very quickly, as you've suggested, really become about survival goals. So I guess the key one of those for me, first off, is hydration, and the need to adequately have fluid to keep you performing, but also being able to survive at your best. And dehydration, or a lack of hydration, then has significant impacts on both hot and cold management, as well as general athletic performance. So your performance degrades as you become more dehydrated. And then you, over time, can lead, at the worst case scenario, you can lead into some really nasty things like affecting your cognitive function, so not being able to think clearly. And then the ultimate, which probably a lot of people have heard of, is rhabdomyolysis, when basically your muscles start to break down and you get a whole lot of really bad consequences from that. So to be avoided at all costs. So sufficient, particularly water and electrolytes, so I guess that brings in the electrolyte part of your question, need to be balanced. So too much of just water or too much of just electrolyte can cause you problems. So you need to balance that. And the general suggestion is just to alternate between electrolyte and free water. So have a flask of water and a flask of electrolyte, or have two bottles set up so that you can do that. So again, that means you have had to plan for that. You've got to have the bottles and have the electrolyte. So thinking about what the nature of the run is also. So if you're going to be doing that in hot, humid conditions or in cold mountain environments, you also use a lot more liquid than through something called insensible evaporation, where you're breathing in and out a lot of liquid to humidify and warm the air in cold environments. So in the tropical north and the cold south, you want to be thinking about your water requirements and planning them very carefully. I think that really then means you've got to map out, I know we'll be talking about this later, but really map out, am I doing an organised run where there'll be facilities and water stations and checkpoints on the way, or is it something I've got to solely provide myself, in which case you probably need to be a little bit more risk averse and be planning ahead.
Yeah, good point.
The other side of that people often don't talk about is too much liquid. So particularly free water, and a condition known as exercise-associated hyponatremia. So basically you dilute out the sodium in your blood, and that causes your brain to swell, and again, that doesn't go anywhere pleasant. So there's a lot of information around about how much you should drink, and that you're becoming dehydrated before you get thirsty, which is true, and some companies have turned that into quite a strong marketing line. However, you want to be cautious of hyponatremia. So the general rule of drink to thirst is probably something that most runners should be gauging. So again, the training in the environment will give you some idea about what your thirst and water requirements are going to be, but you don't want to be chugging water continuously. Certainly pre-hydration, make sure that before you start the race, you are well hydrated, and then drink to thirst during the race will set you up. It's not a reliable indicator, but a good indicator of your hydration status is urine colour. So obviously the darker the urine, the most likely more dehydrated you're going to be. So there's a doctor who works at the ER at Everest Base Camp, and she says drink water, and what you're peeing out should look like what you're drinking in. So that's probably the extreme, and I doubt there are many ultra runners that will be in that condition. But that free fluid and making sure that you keep hydration going is really important.
Yeah, and making sure you're actually peeing as well. And I've heard some people will say, "Oh, I did 100K and I didn't go to the toilet once." Like, there's some alarm bells ringing there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of my favourite questions to athletes was was the last time you had a pee?
Yeah.
Because that's if they say that, before I started, which was 8 hours ago, then they're dehydrated. And I would say that most, particularly ultra runners, are going to be dehydrated. It's the extent of that dehydration that's important.
Just managing the deficit, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about ins and outs. You will lose moisture, as I said, through breathing and through sweating, and you will not be able to keep up with your liquid loss if you're sweating profusely. So yeah, definitely something to be thinking about. And then the final point, I guess, nutrition is, that's the fuel that's driving you. So you're going to be in a calorific deficit just because of the exercise that you're doing. So you want to be able to overcome that. And I know ultra runners have a whole set of weird and wonderful things about whether they eat raspberry jam sandwiches or bananas or whatever it is that their particular thing is. But fuel is important. I guess from a health point of view, it particularly becomes important when you strike a problem, and that problem may be cold, or it may be being injured or being lost, which means you slow down when it's cold. And you need to try to keep warm. Humans are adapted for heat, not cold. When you're trying to stay warm, even when the blood vessels on your skin constrict to try and keep the blood close to the core to stay warm, that takes energy. And if you're already energy depleted from running, then you won't be able to sustain that for a long period of time. So you need fuel to both be able to run, but also to then take care of yourself, particularly in cold conditions. I guess that's the real rub.
Yeah, I think from what you said there, two things came to mind from my own racing experience. So to your point about dehydration being a big problem, you can misperceive the actual weather conditions, can't you? You know, as a runner, you're running and you often feel warm because you're exercising. But if you looked at the sky and it's cloudy and overcast, you can mistakenly think, oh, it's a cold day, and fuel and hydrate to those conditions. But I can remember the 6-foot track 45K race in the Blue Mountains in 2019. It was in March, but it was very hot and very humid, but there was a lot of cloud cover. So looking at the sky, it just looked like an overcast, cloudy day, and a lot of runners drank to a cool, cloudy day kind of race. And at the end, the finish line was just littered with broken, dehydrated runners, and some of whom, did end up going to hospital because they were severely dehydrated. So, yeah, the conditions can, the sky, the perceived weather conditions can throw you. And then to your point about cold weather causing you to use a lot of your calories for thermoregulation, for keeping warm. I actually have succumbed to that problem as well in 2021 in Ultra Trail Australia, the 100K. That year in May was particularly cold. It was unseasonably cold and windy in the Blue Mountains. Look, you always expect to be cold at the start of a race anyway, so you kind of deal with that, but you expect to warm up within half hour or so. I never warmed up. I didn't warm up the whole day, and I refused to stop and put a layer on, put a buff on, put a pair of gloves on, because I was in the mindset of chasing a particularly ambitious time goal that day. And I thought, well, if I stop and put a layer on, I'm going to scupper my time goal. So I didn't stop and put a layer on and scuppered my time goal, because what happened was I didn't get dressed till about 6 p.m, so 16 hours in. And so all the fuel I'd been taking on board, a large proportion of that had been gone to, had been used up, sorry, for keeping me warm, whereas a simple thermal vest top would have done the job.
Yeah.
And so a proportion of the fuel wasn't going to my running muscles, so my pace suffered. I slowed down, I got colder as a result, more of my energy went for thermoregulation. And of course, the other thing that suffers is your brain, isn't it? You know, your brain needs carbohydrates as well. So with most of my fuel going to thermoregulation, my brain was getting energy starved. And so I made a cascade of poor decisions that day that really led to a terrible race. I want to say a comedy of errors, but it wasn't very funny at all. Don't know how I finished, but I did finish the race, but it wasn't pretty. In hindsight, though, I learned a lot retrospectively. So the win is there, I guess. So yeah,
That can
really,
certainly tough way to learn lessons. And I said this in regards to a storm, but the same thing applies to heat and cold. When I was briefing some runners the other day, the environment doesn't care that you're trying to do a PB. It's not in its worry. So you want to take the time. And one of the best things I heard somebody say was be bothered. So if you're cold, be bothered to stop and put a thermal layer on. Be bothered to put your rain shell on to keep warm. Be bothered to put some gloves on, because inevitably you'll have to do that. But you'll be so much worse in condition when you do. Be bothered, I think, is a key thing. The other, just about the mountain environment, we have a lot of mountain races down here in Victoria, and significant difference between the valleys and the peaks. So obviously the valleys are warmer and the peaks are cooler. However, the valleys are often sheltered by trees. And on days where the air temperature isn't that warm, people think, oh, that's nice. And they run by the tree line and get the sun. And that immediately has an impact on them. So, be thinking of those subtleties as well is really important, because it's not given the distances and terrain that people often run through, it's not going to be uniform. It's not going to be, as you say, the start of the race is going to be the same as the end of the race. There's going to be a lot of variation in between.
Yeah, 4 seasons in a day is quite the norm in an ultra, isn't it? So so the weather significantly influences the long run experience, doesn't it? And they say, there's that saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, just poor clothing, and you should try and embrace it. But there are some very real risks to health in cold, wet, and windy conditions, aren't there? So
absolutely.
What would you say about hypothermia? What can you tell us about hypothermia?
Yeah, look, so, and that's a real issue, and we've certainly a number of races that we've provided medical support for, seemingly innocuous things like people just not being too sure of where they're going at 2 a.m. and so slow down because they're a bit cautious about where they're going. They get cold, they don't rug up, they've probably had insufficient calorie intake. And certainly one instance I recall a few years ago, their support crew went out and looked for them and ended up pretty much carrying them back to the checkpoint on the edge of consciousness because they had stopped and become hypothermic. And it was a cold, windy, and not raining, but misty. So there was moisture in the air. So that combination of cold, wind and wet is kind of known really as the three kind of killer things, because the cold, you're losing heat by radiation, the wind, you're losing heat through convection, and then you're also, because you're wet, losing heat through evaporation. So of the 4 mechanisms of heat loss, you're getting 3 of them in good quantity there. And trying to warm up once you're cold is really difficult. It's much easier to go back to trying to maintain an even temperature, as we suggested before, by stopping, putting that extra thermal layer on, putting your shell on, some gloves, a buff or a beanie is always great to put on. I think a lot of ultra running is about dealing with environmental issues, and that takes no small amount of energy both before and after the event. Sorry, before and during the event, after hopefully not so much. But you really need to be thinking about, okay, how am I going to deal with those issues of wind, wet, cold, and then if I end up lying down because I'm injured or I'm exhausted, then you've also got conduction as a mechanism of heat loss. So, you can certainly need to actively manage all four of those. As we said before, that comes back again to hydration. If you're dehydrated, you're going to also suffer the cold, and there's a thing called cold diuresis, where because you get the constriction of the blood vessels at the skin, that then squeezes blood into your core, that perfuses your kidneys very well, so they deal with that by excreting more fluid, and so you wee more, and people might notice that they wee more in cold weather, so that will dehydrate you even without the exercise. And then you've got, sorry?
Yeah, I was going to, sorry.
Yep. Then you've got the, to keep those blood vessels constricted at the surface costs energy, and then if you start to shiver, that's really energy expensive. And so you'll maintain those for a period of time, and then you won't have the energy to do that, and you'll end up significantly hypothermic. Interestingly, little aside, one of the people might have heard of stories of particularly people on Mount Everest being found naked in the snow, and they've actually got undressed when they're cold. So it's called paradoxical undressing. And they think the reason for that is that when the energy supplies to keep the blood vessels constricted away from the surface fail, you get a rush of blood to the surface of the skin, and we sense our temperature from our skin surface, not from our core. And so they suddenly feel hot, and so they start taking clothes off, and then that is kind of the last insult for being pushed over the edge. So really important to be kind of thinking about those. And I guess that another theme that's coming through here is the preparation and forethought, that you have the thermals, you have the shell layer, and you be bothered to stop and put them on. There's a couple of really good resources that people might want to look at. So if you point your search engine at Trail Running Scotland Essential Kit, it's got a really good short video of 3 runners with different levels of equipment sitting out in the obviously balmy Scottish environment, and just seeing how they feel after sort of 20 or 30 minutes sitting in that. And some of them don't last 30 minutes. So that's a really good.
That's a great video. I'll include that in the link for this blog. Actually, that's a really good one to drive the points home, isn't it? I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other one is that one from Tasmania Parks of that they have on a continuous loop in the Cradle Mountain Visitors Centre, because they've had a number of fatalities on the overland track from hypothermia. So look, it's no small issue. People have died and will continue to die from hypothermia all over the world, and often it's people participating in various outdoor activities that are not as prepared as they should be, that end up succumbing to those things.
Yeah, and as you say, it's the simple things, isn't it? It's carrying that raincoat. By checking the weather forecast before you run, you might see there is no rain forecast and there's been no rain for 3 weeks, and you might think, oh, I won't bother with the raincoat, but that raincoat is your shell against the wind, isn't it? So you should carry it irrespective of rain being forecast. Obviously having dry, warm layers available in your pack as well, and keeping them dry. There's no point having these spare clothes if you're not going to keep them dry properly in your pack by putting those into Ziploc bags, double Ziploc bags, or a dry sack, because obviously your pack's going to get sweaty from yourself, and anything in it is going to get wet. So you have to keep your gear dry so that it's effective if you need it. And as you say, go on.
Oh, sorry, just one more thing. I think that's really important to have things and think about that packing beforehand. I guess one of the insidious things about hypothermia is one of the first things that you lose are your fine motor skills. So that means that self-care becomes increasingly difficult. And so even things like people getting into Ziploc bags or undoing dry bags, they haven't got the fine, or doing up zips on parkas, they haven't got the fine motor skills to be able to do that. So they talk about the umbles, mumbles, fumbles, stumbles, grumbles as being the kind of initial indication that hypothermia is setting in. And then very quickly, you're not making clear decisions, which I think you mentioned before with your experience. And people kind of get lulled in that false sense of security of, I'm preparing for the run. If I get cold, I'll just put something on. They don't think about, but if I'm not thinking straight and I can't actually coordinate opening my pack and getting, and I've seen, many runners have had to have people do that for them to get their thermal layer out or their shell layer out and zip it up for them because they just cannot coordinate to mesh the zip and then slide it up. So it's fine to think in our lounge rooms or wherever that, we can, this is easy. I'll just chuck in a couple of light thermal layers because that's what the mandatory gear list says I have to have. And it's no problem. But the reality of the situation is that self-care becomes a huge challenge. And again, people have come unstuck for not being able to self-care.
So those early signs being your fingers not working, that should raise alarm bells instantly, and you need to get those gloves out before you can no longer get the gloves out.
Absolutely. And it should also be a trigger if you come across another runner that's in that situation, thinking, well, hang on, we're both in the same environment and we've been doing the same thing. So if they're starting to suffer, maybe I should be taking some proactive steps to put my thermal layers on, put my shell on and start to shelter. So, it's part of that, really important to offer assistance to other runners so they can do that, but thinking, well, hang on, we're in the same environment, so I need to be doing some self-care.
To be doing what they're doing. Yeah, it's a really good point, that self-awareness piece. Yeah. What you said earlier about being cold, if you're on the ground, if you are injured or you need to lie down for a sleep, for instance, if you're in a 100-mile race or 200-mile race, just making sure you're not directly in contact with the ground. So sitting on your pack or sitting on your space blanket. And to that point, you would suggest, from our previous conversations, Duncan, you'd suggest an upgrade from the basic space blanket, wouldn't you?
Yep, I certainly would. And I actually meant to have it right here, and I do. So something, and I'm not recommending this, but something like a bivvy, so which is not in focus.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
So something that is a sack that you can actually crawl into. Blankets are really hard to hold around you in high winds. And again, if you're kind of, those fine motor skills are becoming a bit challenging, then trying to wrap yourself in what's usually a reasonably small blanket is really difficult. Trying to crawl into a bivvy, which is basically a sack with one opening at the top. So it's like, putting yourself into a hot dog bun. Get in there, and that provides good protection. So certainly recommend, in addition, but instead of a space blanket, maybe thinking about a bivvy instead of the blanket.
Yeah, and I've recently upgraded my space blanket to an emergency bivvy sack. It's not much heavier. It's few grams more. It doesn't take up any more space, and it's going to be a whole lot more effective if you need it, isn't it? So thanks for the tip. And of course, it's not just our bodies that are affected by the cold weather. It's batteries too. Batteries run down much more quickly in cold weather, something that many people aren't even aware of. The battery in your running watch, you might be using your GPS watch for navigation, in which case that function is going to drain your battery more quickly anyway. But if it's cold during the night, then your battery's going to run down more quickly. Same for your mobile phone, same for your head torch. So you're going to need to think about backup batteries for your torch and leads and a power bank as well, so that you are prepared should your battery run down more quickly. So and
some of the things I'd be suggesting is for things like head torches that you can get small and light, have a second one, because whilst the battery might go flat on the first one, you might also lose it or drop it down the rock, or something else might happen to it. Go nuts and have a spare one. You can get them quite small, and light, probably not really what you want to be running by, but will provide you some illumination. We had a case last year out on the Bogong High Plains where somebody was late at night or early in the morning between two huts, and their head torch failed. They said it was charged, whether it was some other problem with the head torch, but they had no, so they were basically stumbling around in the dark trying to see if they could find another runner. But by this stage, the field was pretty spread out to see if they could find their way back to civilization. So, yeah.
Yeah, ultras are hard enough. We don't need to make them harder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and even if you're not in a race, you're just going for a training run and you have no intention of staying out after dark, you should still pack a head torch, because you just never know what's going to happen, do you? You know, you could get hopelessly lost, you could get injured, not injured so that you're totally incapacitated. You might be able to hike your way off the mountain, but of course that's going to take many hours, and you could still be making your way back home after sundown. So have a torch to save yourself there. Definitely.
Particularly if you're in a challenging environment like the Blue Mountains, you don't want to be going off the edge of something, and they can
it's very possible.
They can be incredibly small and light. You can just grab something like this and have it in your running pack if you're not expecting to be out. Then just gives you a bit of peace of mind.
Peace of mind. And I think that's the other thing, just having confidence and peace of mind can take the stress out of the day, can't it? So even if you don't need to use the thing, you just know it's there, don't you? So and let's think about the weather at the other end of the extreme scale. What about hot, humid weather? Like, as runners, we know that it's more challenging to run in the summer months, and that's if it is true, the body works so much harder under hot, humid conditions. Two reasons off the top of my head: your heart has to work harder to pump blood closer to the skin, to dilate the blood vessels as a heat loss mechanism for evaporation at the skin surface. Also, you're losing more water via sweat. So the watery constituent of the blood, the plasma, which is mostly water, you're losing a lot of that through sweat. And so your blood is more viscous in that situation. And so the heart has to pump a more treacle-like substance to all areas of the body and the brain, of course. So that is why the heart works harder, and that is why running in the summer feels hard, because it is. But aside from the extra challenge, what about the health risks in hot and humid conditions?
Yeah, and I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's the combination of the heat and the humidity. Heat on its own can certainly be an issue. When you combine the heat with the humidity is where we certainly get illness happening much earlier. And the reason for that is that our bodies cool themselves by evaporation of sweat from the skin. In human conditions, that evaporation's decreased, and so therefore you're not getting the same cooling effect. So the body heats up and retains that heat. It doesn't mean you're going to lose any less liquid. So you're still going to lose the same amount of liquid. You're just not going to be as cooled as efficiently as if it was a lower humidity. And so what happens then is that you become dehydrated. All those issues you talked about, absolutely, blood pressure increases because the heart's working harder, and you then get warmer, and so that can then become a positive feedback cycle, which can cause some real issues. And so you kind of enter this continuum from sort of heat stress or heat exhaustion all the way through to heat stroke, and being the heat stroke being the one that's a real life-threatening issue. Again, exacerbated by dehydration. So we want to be hydrating, and we also want to be we'll probably be drinking more because our demand will be higher. So we then want to be thinking about our electrolyte balance and making sure that we're not drinking litres and litres of free water. We want to be mixing that up with electrolytes so that we don't get dilutional hyponatremia as well. So that is important. And it also, there's been actually quite a bit of work done on athletes performing in these conditions. There's actually a really good bit of the Bureau of Meteorology website that if you look under observations, and there's a section called thermal load, thermal heat, which has a good explanation there, but it also gives you some of the, or two of the kind of most important numbers that combine both the humidity and the temperature with the wind and to some extent the sun, although that's not well included. And that's the wet bulb globe temperature and the apparent temperature. So those two things then are used to see how much you should be exerting yourself. There's also links on the Bureau of Meteorology site to the Sports Medicine Institute that then have temperatures by which you should consider various activities.
Yeah, cool. I'll look those up.
Yeah, certainly worth looking at, and it has a good explanation of thermal stress and thermal loads. But basically, that combination of humidity, temperature, and the sun. So we talked before about getting above the tree line. That's when you really feel that sun beating down on you. If you're going to be running under those conditions, then again, think about what it is. Think about what clothing you're wearing. The other weekend, we had a race up at Mount Buller, and it was not that warm, low 20s, 21, 22, but the sun and the humidity were high. And the number of runners running in black tops and bottoms was just amazing.
Yeah.
So, think about the light colours so that you're not absorbing heat from the sun, and think about loose fitting. And I know it doesn't look as good on the podium, but loose fitting clothing to allow airflow between the clothing and your skin. So those are the kind of factors, and then really focusing on what's your hydration strategy for the run. Is it, again, as we said before, is it supported? Can you rely on water being at certain places, or do you have to then think about hydrating yourself? And then all those other things, well, okay, I'm running near mountain streams, but does that mean you should be thinking about water purification? Are you happy just to drink from the stream? Should you be carrying something like a filter or something to purify the water? Because nothing worse than having a good drink from a mountain stream and a few hours later having some unintended consequences that mean you haven't got a lot of people standing around you at the finish line. So, those sorts of things are all part of that planning and that preparation, to be thinking about what is the environment I'm running in, what are the challenges I'm going to be facing. I know heat and humidity are going to be some of those challenges I need to address, and what are the things that I need to be thinking of to address those.
Yeah, and thinking of, will I need to get something from a stream? It's no drama to pack a couple of water purifying tablets. They're really tiny and they last for years. Once you've bought a box, you don't need to buy another box for 10 years. So it's a no-brainer, isn't it? And, many of the long runs that ultra runners do are long enough for a bacteria to grow quite nicely during the race. So, quite easy to avoid that situation with a bit of thought, isn't it? So
exactly, absolutely. And you're right, it needs that thought. So do you have a spare container that you can then, because you need to leave the little purification tablet in there for 30 minutes, depending on the manufacturer's recommendations? Do you have a container that you can put aside for 30 minutes and not drink from that, and wait until that's processed, and then you can drink from that and swap your containers around? So it's again a matter of thinking those things through.
And in terms of cooling, is there a safe and an unsafe way to cool down? What's the best advice?
So that other extreme of heat stroke. So heat stroke is a medical emergency. It's life-threatening. You need to cool somebody by any means that you can, as quickly as you can. So probably the gold standard is full immersion in cold water, obviously keeping the airway above the water and managing that. But if you can't do that, dousing the person in cold water, taking their clothing off. Forget modesty at this stage. You need to cool that person by whatever means that you can. Throwing water, even water from your drink bottles, throwing it over them, cooling them down. Just a little aside, there's still a number of people that say that loss of sweating is one of the key indicators of heat stroke. It's not. There's whole lot of things that will make you stop sweating. Dehydration, some medications. The key hallmark of heat stroke is an altered mental status. So if someone is not quite right, they're irritable, well, more irritable than running the race they would be anyway. Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the issues that people are going to be hot, they're going to be sore, they're going to be bothered, and so is this heat stroke or isn't it? You need to take the time then to say, try and ask some questions and work out what's going on. But anybody with an altered mental state, particularly if they're confused, obviously if they're not conscious, any of those things in hot conditions, you want to be just cooling them straight away. If they're not hot, it's not going to hurt them. You don't want to go too far, but that's unlikely to happen. And to also then get help as fast as you can. So also having communication of some sort to be able to get assistance. And I guess for people, the other thing for people to be considering is there's a number of medications that exacerbate intolerance to heat. So everything from beta blockers to anticholinergics to antipsychotic. There's a whole suite of medications that affect your ability to shed heat, and plus or minus sweating. So if you do take medications regularly, it's worth looking at those and just seeing what the effect on heat.
That's a really good point, because your standard GP is not going to say, are you planning to run 168 Ks this weekend? So no. Yeah, really good point. Good point. And aside from the extremes of heat, hypothermia, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, just basically, if you are running for hours on the top of a mountain and you've been exposed, you maybe need to just stop and put some sunscreen on, because sunburn in itself can be a real showstopper, can't it? So,
absolutely. I've seen people with some really debilitating, got sunburn, particularly across the back of the neck.
Yeah, or the calves.
They might have been wearing and they just can't bear their pack straps to be on. So, and you'll be perspiring significantly, as we said. So you'll be rinsing sunscreen off. Again, it's that be bothered. Be bothered to stop and put some sunscreen on. Yeah. The sun doesn't care that you're trying to do a PB, as I said. So the fact that you wait, lose 90 seconds putting sunscreen on.
I learned that the hard way. Just stop a couple of minutes to address whatever issue needs to be addressed can save your whole race. So, yeah. And of course, again, it's not just bodies affected by the weather. Phones can suddenly shut down if they get hot. That's something to also be mindful of too, because your phone is probably one of the most important bits of kit in terms of communication, in terms of navigation, or needing it in an emergency. And, you should think about storing your phone somewhere that's not directly in contact with your skin. So if you've got a pocket in your backpack that's away from your own back, that'll be a good place to store it, so that if you do need your phone, it is available to you. I've had the situation where I've been driving and my phone on the dashboard has got really hot in the sun, and you're coming up to an intersection and it just gives a little 3-second warning, phone is shutting down, and you end up in Canberra, not Katoomba. So
absolutely. And also keep it from near the top of your pack. If you can kind of bury it in the middle somewhere, then that keeps it the most insulated. So
good point. And navigation was going to be my next point, so it's segued into that. Navigation is something that can pose additional challenges in certain environments for some runners more than others. And this is where I can hear my friends laughing, because I am one of those runners who struggles with navigation. I'm absolutely fine following a GPX file on my watch, but if I tripped and smashed my watch, I would be in trouble. No spatial awareness, cannot retain landmark information, and so it is a problem. In your experience, Duncan, what kinds of situations lead to runners getting lost and requiring rescue?
So I think there's probably 3 areas. Lack of preparation. We're sounding like a broken record on that one, but they have no idea where the route. No idea where the route is going. I've known of runners phoning the race director and asking questions, and the race directors had to say, you do realise this is 100 miles, it's 160 kilometres. Oh, I thought it was 100. And you do realise there's 7,500 metres of ascent, and Everest is just over 8,000 metres. Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah.
You mean I can't just go back to the motel and sleep? No. So understanding what you're doing. So again, preparation and being clear about that. The second one is loss of situational awareness, which easy to do on an ultra, particularly because you're focused, you're in the zone, you've got a goal, and you're not thinking about what's happening at the current time. Particularly if you're talking to someone or you've got headphones or earpods in and you're kind of zoned out, going along to the tunes and not paying attention to particularly track and road intersections and that sort of thing, and just kind of blithely going on till you run out of something.
Run off the cliff.
And then the third one, as you've suggested, Joe, is equipment failure. So phone batteries going flat, phones becoming inoperable. We had someone last year who got lost very shortly after the start, spent a number of hours getting themselves back on track, flattened their phone battery because it was trying to download maps and do GPS, etc. And then so couldn't contact anybody to say that they were okay, but had found themselves back on track. And so after 12 hours, they were about to become the subject of a big search and rescue exercise. And fortunately, somebody came across them before that happened. So I think they're the main things. And I think, like you do as a race strategy, breaking the race down into sections, and particularly if you're trying to do a certain pace or a certain time and you're trying to kind of divide the race up into those segments, also do that from a kind of navigation point of view. All right, I'm climbing Mount Bogong up T-Spur, so I can expect to be going steadily uphill, there's no downhill, for an hour and a half to 2 hours. So if you find yourself going steeply downhill, something's wrong.
Something's gone wrong. Yes.
And you need to stop and kind of reevaluate. Did I just miss this bit of downhill, or am I really heading off towards the big river valley and I'll never be seen again? So, break it up into, am I supposed to be running along a ridge, but I'm climbing steeply? Yeah, there's something wrong going on there. Am I supposed to be running through forest and I'm up above the tree line? So again, it's that kind of thinking about, well, what am I expected to do and what am I actually doing? So it's also having, and people have talked about ways or means to kind of refocus their situational awareness. So, when you're in that groove, when you're really goal oriented, you got your tunes happening, something to just put the hand up and say, well, hang on, just let's look at the environment. Are we where we think we should be?
Yeah.
And, some people might do it on distance. Some people might do it on when they change their flasks, or, there's something to kind of break yourself out of that almost tunnel vision and be just having a bit of a look around. Where am I? Am I where I think I am? Because obviously if you have taken a wrong turn, the more time you spend heading off in the direction you're going, the further away you're going to get from the course, and therefore harder to find, etc. So one of the things we do is try and find people out on courses that do that. And inevitably they have just been so focused on the goal that they've completely forgotten to look where they're going.
It's surprisingly easy to do. You can lose hours in a run. I mean, in fact, that is how we do get through these runs, by zoning out, right? That you can't completely tune in the whole time. It's too much. So absolutely. You just have to come back regularly, don't you?
Yeah, try and get that in and out. And what's the trigger to do that? So thinking about something to be a trigger to up periscope and see what's going on.
Yeah, I've actually thought of something for that one. I'll come back to that at the end to summarize. So, and what you say, it's about that course knowledge, isn't it? The terrain and the elevation profile, and also what the terrain is like as well. Are you expecting it to be like smooth and runnable? In which case, if you find yourself bush bashing, something's gone wrong, hasn't it? So yeah,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think
And
it's really important.
and that applies to whether you're going on a prepared course or whether it's something that you've thought, oh, I'll, string a few tracks together and that'll be a nice run to do. Yeah, spend the time looking at a map and having some idea about what those tracks might look like.
Definitely. And apart from the hard copy map and compass, there are several navigation apps you can download on your phone that will still work whether or not you've got reception, So things like Capra, Gaia, or Avenza, those are just three off the top of my head. I've used them all, they're really effective. But again, you have to know how to use them. You can't just pull them out in an emergency and know how that app responds when you're on or off track. So you've got to practice with these things. It's the same with the GPX watch. You have to know how it responds when you're on or off track as well. So it's always worth getting a GPX file from a mate or from your own run locally in a safe environment and just practicing going off route, coming back on route, so you know how your watch behaves and you know when to respond to it. So
Absolutely. And I think that's a really key thing. You want to be doing these things in the calm, cool environment of having a practice. You don't want to be doing it when you're trying to do a PB and you're up against the last minute you could possibly be there. The other thing from those apps and they all do it, is to find out how they can indicate your current location. So if you do need to call for assistance, being able to provide your location. So emergency service operators one of the first things they'll ask you or try to determine is your location. And often you can't get past that. Until they've got a location, they won't take any more information. So be able to, whether it's a latitude and longitude or a grid reference or an emergency marker or whatever it is, find out how your app or the Emergency Plus app on your phone can indicate, can indicate your position and know how to relatively easily get that up on the screen so that you can communicate that to whether it be the race director or whether it be emergency services. And also just like to hard back to something you said just before, hard copy map and compass, perfect. So no matter what technology you've got, it will fail. At some stage, sometime, it will fail. So again, not much weight. You can, if you're really a weight weenie, you can get one of the little thumb compasses. You can reduce your map to a single piece of paper in a Ziploc bag that weighs a few grams. Worth making the effort to make sure that you're carrying those.
And you know how to use it.
And you know how to use it. Yeah, absolutely.
And to that point, preparing for our chat today actually caused me to shine a light on my weaknesses and areas that I could improve. And as I've said, navigation is definitely a weakness. So I've actually booked myself onto a navigation course in the Blue Mountains early next year. So I am onto it and I'm going to upskill in that area. So thank you for that.
Excellent. Excellent. And look, that's something we teach our medics. So a lot of people don't innately know how to navigate. And a lot of people are interested in not being totally reliant on the GPS. So it's a skill well worth acquiring. So good on you.
It is, yeah. I look forward to that. It's another excuse to go camping in the mountains. So, I love being in nature. So any excuse is perfect, and this will be valid. And my friends are probably nodding profusely, going, "Thank goodness for that."
At last.
At last, all these years. Yeah. So speaking of nature, we do love running in nature, of course, but there are times that we might find ourselves closer to it than we might like. What would you say about snakes, Duncan?
I'd say, hello, Mr. Snake. So I think the first thing, and as part of the wilderness medicine training we do, we actually get a snake handler to come in with some of the little guys and which is, really interesting. So it's also very interesting hearing that perspective. So despite popular beliefs, snakes are not aggressive. So they're not going to chase you down and try and eat you. The snake's that big and you're this big. It's not trying to eat you. The snake, though, will vigorously defend itself if it feels threatened. So it'll strike and it will try and protect itself. And it's going to feel threatened when it gets stood on, funnily enough. But also when it feels cornered and when it feels like it's in a position where it hasn't got any alternative to strike. So I guess the thing to be aware of is that we have a huge variety of snake species in Australia, that they are not all the same. So some have really good eyesight, like brown snakes, and some have really poor eyesight, like tiger snakes. And so the tiger snake isn't actually going to see you until you're about to stand on it, whereas the brown snake will see you several meters away. And so people say, tiger snakes are aggressive because you're almost going to stand on it. All of a sudden, it feels like it's under threat, and so it rears up and strikes. So the advice is, if you see a snake, so first of all, keep watching for snakes. And I don't know about you, Joe, but whenever I'm in the bush, I assume there are snakes there.
Yeah,
That's just the default position. We're not in New Zealand, so we just need to assume that there's a snake everywhere. So keep an eye out for them. If you see one, stop, move back slowly, try not to make it feel threatened, go around it. It may, if it's startled, may move out of the way. That's fine, just stand still and let it go. But allow it to go where it wants. And if it's lying in the sun on the path, so snakes conform to their environment. So that means if it's cold, the snake's cold and wants to warm up by being in the sun. So it will then find itself in a sunny position, which might be in the middle of the path. If it's hot, the snake wants to cool down, so it will seek shade, which might be in the shade of a tree on the side of a path. So just, again, thinking about the environment, thinking about what the conditions are. And if you see one, just let it go about its business. Don't try and chase it. Don't try and get out of the way. Don't try and prod it with a stick. Don't try and throw anything at it. Just let it get out of the way. And obviously, if you're bitten, have your snakebite bandage handy, pressure immobilisation bandage. So that's got two parts, so pressure and immobilisation. So we want to wrap the limb, hopefully it's on a limb, marking the site where the bite is, and then stay still. So immobilisation means that help comes to the person isn't assisted out to help. So if that happens, stop. Wrap the limb. If it's yours, wrap it over somebody else's. Get them to lie still. Get help to come and attend to the patient. Don't try and move the patient.
And of course, with the advent of the indicator bandages, that must have helped outcomes now. That without, you don't need a lot of first aid knowledge, but with the indicator bandage, which means that the rectangles on the bandage turn into squares at the correct tension, you're going to apply a more effective pressure bandage and improve the outcome of that bite, aren't you? So that's also worth upgrading. If you're just carrying a standard bandage, it's worth getting the one with the indicator rectangles on it.
Yes, and there was interesting bit of research done a couple of years ago where they found that people that did not regularly apply snake bandage, including health professionals, applied them at the wrong tension and the wrong overlap. So whilst you might think you know the tension, as you say, the rectangles to squares, and overlapping each of the rectangles with the subsequent wrap gives you the right coverage and the right tension. So
it's actually surprisingly tight, isn't it?
It is. It is. So you're aiming to prevent lymphatic return and you're not trying to cut blood supply off to the limb. So in that light of not telling people things they already know, we don't put tourniquets on it, we don't cut the wound, we don't suck the wound, we don't put Condy's crystals in it, all that sort of stuff. We just wrap it in a pressure immobilisation bandage and immobilise the limb. So those triangles. The other thing, and we had a bit of a chat about wilderness medicine before, improvisation. So that snake bandage can also be your ankle bandage and your knee bandage. It can put over a bleeding wound, stop the bleeding on a wound. You can use it to hold your runner together after the soles come away from the upper. Whole stack of different uses, worth getting a decent one. The other issue with just the normal crate bandage is they're pathetic and won't maintain the pressure, and they're also way too short. For a big adult, you'll probably need two of the full-size bandages to bandage a lower limb. So yeah, definitely go for the proper snakebite bandage, not a crepe or other broad bandage.
A good upgrade, another good upgrade. And with the improvisation as well, running poles would be a good splint if you
Yep,
can't find
absolutely.
anything. Yeah. And
Yep.
speaking of first aid then, let's think about the most common issues that are faced by the runners that you've had to help. What specific first aid skills and first aid kit would you say are essential for runners to carry?
So I think the the best initial first aid skill is take a breath. So most of the injuries that we see are soft tissue injuries. So things like blisters, sprains, strains, that sort of thing. And it hurts and it's unpleasant. So there's nothing like kind of taking a breath, just a calming breath in, have a look at the situation, do an assessment, think about what's going on, and then formulate a plan.
Stay calm.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to feel like a ball in a pinball machine and be bouncing around from, oh, they're bleeding. Oh, no, they're not. Oh, what are they going to do? They're lying down. Are they still okay? Just
stay calm. Yeah.
Yeah. So soft tissue injuries, good to be able to deal with that. Have some things to deal with blisters. So that's often a good size Band-Aid. Some of the specific blister products are good, but read the instructions. Some are meant to be only applied to dereef blisters. Some are meant to be applied to blisters still intact. So think about what it is, and I'm sure people will know for themselves what their propensity to blisters is like. So be thinking about how they manage that, looking at the products that can help that. But worst case scenario is making a donut out of something and putting sticky plaster over the top. So a roll of some sort of tape is always good, and you don't need to take the full roll. Put a couple of wines around a water bottle or a running pole. Gives you that without necessarily burdening the kit. Snakebite bandage, as I said, is really good for a multitude of purposes. And that's probably your essential kit, really. I guess the key assessment thing to make is, can the person get themselves out or are they going to need assistance? So obviously if someone is at the extreme end of not being responsive and they're unconscious of the side of the track, then you want to be going through your doctor's ABC algorithm. So danger, response, send for help, airway, breathing, circulation, and if necessary, so if they're not breathing normally and they're not responding to you, then you need to be starting CPR, which is going to be no small feat. But one of the good things about runners in events particularly is that everybody helps everybody else, and we've certainly looked after people, and there's been a crowd with people wanting to know if they can help in some way. So that's always a really positive thing. Then working out, can the person get themselves out, or are they going to need assistance? If it's an organised event, speaking to the race director. If it's you out on your own or with some friends and you come across somebody, then phoning emergency services, again, knowing about your location, about, to the best of your ability, making you can make some pretty gross assessment pretty early on. Are they breathing? Are they conscious? Are they bleeding? They're the key questions emergency services are going to ask you, so be prepared to answer those. Obviously, if they're not breathing, you want to make them breathe. If they're bleeding, you want to stop them bleeding. So
some basic first aid knowledge.
Basic fundamental.
Just get yourself on a course.
Certainly, absolutely. Certainly, I'd encourage anybody that spends a lot of time out on the trails, sure, do a first aid course, but do a wilderness first aid course is probably more appropriate. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot more practical. You do a lot of scenarios. There's a heap of providers around Australia, and it's more appropriate to the sort of situations you're going to find yourself in. Most of the kind of standard level 2 courses assume there's an ambulance sort of 20 minutes away. So, do something that's more specifically aimed at the wilderness. Just Google wilderness first aid courses
Yes.
and you should be able to find one in your location.
That's good advice. And any knowledge, of course, is power, isn't it? You know, as an ultra runner, one of the biggest things we talked about is blisters and foot problems. And those are the kinds of things that can stop your race or lead to a rescue. And just as an ultra runner, be responsible for knowing what to do with your feet. I highly recommend, there's a great book called Fixing Your Feet by John von Hoff. It's all about the foot. And I would say it actually saved my miler last year, just knowing what to do in all sorts of situations and just knowing what to carry. You know, I had certain things in my pack that I'd never heard of pre-reading that book, and they literally saved my race. You know, at 120 Ks, I had something to patch my shoe with, not my foot. It was something to stop the friction between the hotspot and my actual shoe. And prior to reading the book, I'd never heard of such a thing, you know, and it was like, oh, I've got one of those in my pack, and I was able to keep running. So yeah, Fixing Your Feet, read that book, folks.
Good advice.
So, yeah, let's think about training and overall fitness next. From your experience in helping runners, does training and overall fitness influence the odds of a runner getting themselves into trouble or not?
Yes and no. So, you know, people, you can certainly get yourself into trouble no matter what your fitness if you suffer some sort of trauma, you know, so fall over and take a skid and do some gravel surfing. So that's, easily
Can happen to anyone.
can be done. Yep. But I'd probably have to say that it's probably the runners more in the second half of the field that tend to have issues, and particularly those soft tissue injuries that aren't used to doing the sort of demands that the runners putting them through. So we occasionally get some people in the higher ends, but it's most likely the second half of the field that are going to have issues, and even the things like some nausea and vomiting, because they haven't got their, as very first discussion point, they haven't got their nutrition dialed in, and so they've been chugging on goos and not drinking anything much, and then suddenly they don't feel too good, and that is self-limiting. So that I think experience and certainly training and fitness is something that is the more of those things you have, the more likely you are to come out unscathed. But by the same token, certainly any runner can come a cropper and end up a bit the worse for wear, as I'm sure everybody who's been running on a trail has at some stage.
Oh yes. But it might be a good idea to get a coach, hey?
Of course.
Shameless plug.
Why didn't I think of that? Yeah.
Someone who's going to prepare you for your goal race according to your experience, goals, and needs. So from what we've said, it's clear that before running in remote areas, prior preparation is key, both in the physical sense and also in having the right stuff in your pack and the right knowledge in your head. And Duncan, you and I discussed writing a prescriptive checklist of essential items that runners should pack for long trail runs. But then we decided against that because we thought that long lists can seem overwhelming, be misinterpreted, be misread in a hurry so that items get left off, and they essentially take the thinking out of the equation, right? So as an alternative approach, we've come up with a simple list of 10 pre-run considerations with the aim of empowering runners to, 1, think for themselves, 2, to adapt what they pack and identify gaps in their knowledge in the context of the specific run that they've got planned, and 3, take ownership for their experience of and have respect for the environment that they're about to immerse themselves in, right? So essentially, our list of pre-run considerations are to provoke reflection on what could go wrong and then identify the appropriate preventative or corrective actions whilst the runner is still at home pre-run in a calm and safe environment. Because as we've said, our capacity for logical thinking greatly diminishes when we're fatigued, cold, wet, in pain, lost and hungry, or potentially all of the above. So before we get to our list of pre-run considerations, I'd just like to say something about the power of visualization. Now, visualization is something I encourage all the athletes I work with to engage in before their major races. And this is because studies have shown that the brain doesn't distinguish between real or imagined scenarios. And so visualization can be an incredibly powerful tool. So when it comes to planning long runs in remote mountain areas, if you've spent time visualizing something going wrong and then visualized your next right actions, you've essentially created a shortcut neurologically. The brain behaves as if the imagined experience was a real memory and stores it as such. So that in real life, if you actually find yourself in the situation, you get to the next right action much more quickly than if you'd never given any thought to the situation before, because your brain just thinks, oh, I've been here before, and takes you to the answer much more quickly. Okay, so I think this is fascinating and powerful and well worth knowing, because it could potentially save a life. So to finish up, Duncan, would you please run us through our list of 10 pre-run considerations, and we'll expand on any points needed as we go. Thanks.
Yeah, sure, Joe. And not surprisingly, it reflects a lot of the conversation that we've had so far. So first one is sufficient fuel. So as we talked about nutrition, hydration and electrolytes, look at the length, look at the time of year, look at what your energy demands are going to be, what you're going to be able to do in terms of pick things up. Is it part of an organised race? Is it part of something that you're doing on your own or with a group of friends? So thinking clearly and having obviously experience helps with that, but thinking about what you're going to need to sustain all those things we talked about in terms of energy and hydration, etc. And also think about what that margin is. So if something does come unstuck, if you do get lost, if you do roll an ankle and can't keep going, have you got enough to wait and to stay warm while someone comes and finds you? So thinking about some of those scenarios, as Joe was just talking about, visualization, not only of the actual things that you do, but what some of those different branches of progress might be and where you might end up. Second one's correct gear. So thinking about what it is that you're going to be taking, is it suitable for the environment? And as we've mentioned many times, the environment is all pervasive in ultra running, and the environment's pretty tough on gear. So certainly if you're running on the Larapinta, say, there's a lot of sharp rocks and a lot of things that can slice and dice gear very quickly. So be thinking about yeah, exactly. What it is it an alpine environment? Is it a coastal environment? Is it inland? Is it arid? Is it rainforest? Is it temperate, tropical, whatever it is? So be thinking about that, be thinking about what it is, how much of the stuff you need, what sort of quality. Obviously, there's no point in taking bomb-proof stuff if you're not going to be in an environment that's going to need that, because you're unnecessarily taking extra weight. But by the same token, there's no sense taking your ultralight gear down to the Dolomite Cliffs in Tasmania, because it will get completely shredded. Thinking about what your communications capacity is. So we've spoken about communications a few times. We've mentioned phones and batteries, etc. Thinking about how you're going to sustain power. And as a principle, have two independent means of communication. So particularly if you use one of the satellite messengers and a mobile phone as an example of two independent means of communication, you can go the old analog communication route, which basically is a whistle or a little mirror for reflecting to signal things. They are really valid. It's amazing how far a whistle will travel in the bush environment.
Providing it's a proper one and not the little one that comes with your pack.
Your pack. Exactly. I was just going to say, don't use the one on the shoulder strap of your pack, because the person standing next to you will have trouble hearing it.
Yes.
And get one of the ones that is 100 and something decibels and pierce your eardrums. Yeah. And be thinking about the environment that you're putting stuff like delicate electronics, fall on your phone. That's going to put it out of commission pretty quickly. We've already mentioned hot and cold. the thinking about what you're going to subject this year to, looking at the ratings of the equipment you're using. Is it waterproof? Do you need to separately pack it? And don't, if you're carrying two forms of communication, don't pack them both together in the same dry bag. Separate them so that they both don't go rolling off down the rock together.
Good point. And it turns back to the phone, just have a waterproof, smash-proof cover for it, because you might drop it or you might fall on it, and you might not have a bad fall that you've hurt yourself, but it could be enough to smash your phone, and therefore if you need it to navigate, it's useless. So, and similarly, if there's a torrential downpour and you're lost, you're not going to be able to get your phone out and use it if you don't have it in a waterproof cover. So yeah, I think that's essential. And I've heard of people in the running community advocating buying the cheapest mandatory gear just to get past mandatory gear checks in a race, and also buying children-sized items to save space and weight. And I just, I think the thing with mandatory gear is you don't often need it, but when you need it, you need it. So it has to be the best quality and fit for purpose. So
yeah. And I guess the thing is, the mandatory gear is not for the race director. They're fine. They're probably somewhere in a nice warm building, comfortable. The mandatory gear is protecting you. So skimp on it at your peril.
Yes. And I hope the discussion today has raised really highlighted why those items are on the list, and people will stop showing up for mandatory gear lists without them, and give race directors worldwide a break.
I'm constantly amazed how many people want to shortcut mandatory gear. We see it at pretty much every event. And do I really need to take that? Enough said. I guess we've talked about a few times, Joe, the difference between being part of an organised event and just getting out on your own or with friends, and be mindful of the sorts of differences that makes. It's one of the reasons you're paying your entry fee is to have that entire support network, which usually includes medics like us, as well as aid stations and all sorts of things. If they're not there because you're not participating in it, then think about how you're going to meet those needs that are being met by the race infrastructure. It's always something to consider. And probably they're the ones you're most likely to casual, it's a 10K loop, I always do, so therefore I don't really need to be thinking about it.
Yeah, but on your 10K loop close to home, on a cold, windy, wet day, you can still break an ankle and get hypothermia.
And I guess because it has worked all the time previously, doesn't mean it's going to keep working that way into the future.
That's exactly right. And then back to that mandatory gear list, that just looking at number 3 on our list, I would use a mandatory gear list as a basis to pack my pack, depending on the environment. So if I was going on holiday down in Victoria and I was going for a lovely mountain run in the Vic Alps, I would have a look at a trusted race director's website, something like Running Wild's Alpine Challenge 100K, which takes place in an alpine environment, and I'd use that mandatory gear list as a basis to pack my pack. And to your point, I'd add to it because I wouldn't have the support of the volunteers and aid stations. Conversely, if I was going on holiday in tropical far north Queensland, I would check Ultra Series Australia's Unreasonable East race mandatory gear, because the gear on the 2 different websites would reflect the particular environment, and also the skill set that you'd need would differ in those 2 environments too. So for instance, in tropical far north Queensland, I might need to know what to do if I meet a crocodile, whereas if I was running up Mount Buffalo down in Victoria, the chances of meeting a crocodile are a little slimmer. So it's worth
and all those other things that we one of the big things we found out doing an event earlier this year was ticks. So some places in Australia, not a problem. Other places, you're going to get infested with ticks, and knowing how to deal with them and having the appropriate equipment is an important thing to do. And emphasise freeze, don't squeeze for ticks.
Yeah.
Look it up.
Good point. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, number 5.
So expected environment, we sort of talked about environment conditions and what the variations are going to be. Probably laboured the point enough, but state it again, the environment and dealing with environmental issues is probably one of the things that sets ultra running apart from a lot of other sports. And certainly, whilst you might experience some of those things on road, you're not going to experience them to the same condition that you are out on the trails. So a lot of your effort, both physical and psychological, is about dealing with the environment. So respect that and treat it seriously, put the effort into actually dealing with it.
Absolutely.
Number 6, talking about knowing the proposed route, and we've had a chat about having some idea about where you're running, what the stages are going to look like, what you should be doing, uphill, downhill, across dales, spurs, whatever, and keeping that situational awareness, having some mechanism to push yourself out of the goal-focused and to be thinking about what communication tools you're going to use and what to do in an emergency. And what Joe was saying about before, visualizing, sitting there thinking about, I suddenly realise I'm lost. What am I going to do?
Yes.
And running through those steps, sitting down, having a drink, having a snack, and then thinking about what's going on, what do I do, where was the last time I really knew where I was, how far away was that, have I got something I can see on my phone or my watch or my paper map to work out where I am and get myself back on course.
And having backups, as you said, the watch, the map, the app on your phones.
Yep. And then taking that the step further, is not just being lost. What else? What if I got unexpected emergency or a situation that could arise? How can I deal with that? So, have I got the equipment, the knowledge? What am I going to do? And what are some of the potential scenarios? And they might be happening to yourself, or they might be someone you come across. Yeah. We've certainly had on events people in distress when we've been asked to assist that have nothing to do with the event. They just happen to be out in that environment and found themselves in a spot of bother. And you know, certainly my experience of the ultra running community is they're all pretty much good Samaritans, and people will want to lend a hand and assist. So be thinking about. It's
part of the etiquette, isn't it? It's the unspoken rule within the trail running community. So yeah, you should still, expect to need to action this information, even if it's not yourself that's in the situation.
Yeah, completely.
Right,
we kind of spoke a little bit about first aid kits. There's a stack of different information out there about first aid kits. Go through, have a look at, as Joe suggested, some of that mandatory equipment from races. There's all sorts of things online. There's a number of websites that have equipment, first aid equipment for adventure persons, adventure races, adventure pursuance. So look at those, think about, and some of it's going to be a bit of trial and error. When you do pack a first aid kit, make a list of what's in there, and after your run or event, have a look through and just think, well, what did I use? What might I have used? What was there no chance of me using? And think about, like, if it's snakebite bandage, don't chuck that out, but think about, how can I refine my kit with each iteration? What is it that I've been thinking about, what nearly happened or what did happen, and what can I then include to think about in future that I should be carrying with me?
So that's a good suggestion, a post-run debrief sooner rather than later before the memory fades.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And the couch beckons. Yes, and so some ID and record of medical conditions, allergies. If you do take medications regularly or have allergies, certainly include those on some paper is probably a really good idea. The emergency services will look for ice on your phone in case of emergency, which should contain your emergency contact and any information. And particularly if you have a life-threatening allergy, you definitely want to be including that on there so that people are aware of that. And final one, let someone know before you go. So tell somebody what you're doing and when to expect you back. So I usually tell people when I'm going out, this is where I'm going, this is what I'm doing, and I'm kind of be expected to be back at 5, but don't call anybody or don't chase things up unless you haven't heard from me by sort of 7 or 8. So I'll give myself a couple of hours of leeway because I might just be having a bit of a geographical moment and just take a bit longer to get to where I'm going. So it doesn't need to be pushing the balloon up straight away, but have someone at least, if you're not back by the next morning, again, depending on the weather conditions. So if you're going out in a howling blizzard, then you need to be thinking about that. But also you want your safety margin to be much less. So it's that whole kind of risk-benefit thing that the more that you're upping the risk, the more conservative you want to be in terms of putting some parameters around time to alert, all that sort of information. So be thinking about that before you go. How familiar are you with the terrain, all those things.
Yeah, and of course, when you finish your run, check in with your person on the ground
Yes.
as well. There's nothing worse for your significant other to be at home worried sick about you while you're in the pub having a beer with your mates. So a quick text just to say we're done and we're off to the pub.
And there's a number of instances, particularly Alpine resorts, where that happened, and the police are none too pleased when they finally find the person. So, yeah, just show some respect to them and let people know that you're back.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Duncan, for sharing your knowledge and experience today during our insightful conversation. I really appreciate that. I think there's a lot of valuable points in there. Thank you. To summarize, the key takeaways for anyone planning long training runs or races in remote areas are: pre-run, do the prep, ensure you're physically fit, maybe get a coach, have the right stuff in your pack and the right knowledge in your head. Mid-run, be bothered and think early intervention. And to encourage with the regular self-check situation, I've come up with an acronym that you can run through in your mind at least hourly, and it's called LIFT, L-I-F-T. And LIFT stands for: L is for location. Are you on or off track, and when did you last notice? I is for issues. Do you have hot spots, blisters, chafing, niggles that require your attention now, or else they become big problems later, causing you to DNF your race or require rescue? F is for fuel. That's your nutrition, hydration, and electrolyte intake. The right stuff in the right amounts at the right times. And when did you last take these things on board? It can be surprisingly easy to forget. And T is temperature. Do you need to layer up or down for comfort or safety? Are you wet? You might not have been in the rain or crossed a river, but the sweat on your clothing can make you pretty wet. And if, of course, as we've discussed, if the wind is picking up, you're on top of a mountain, that is a sure way to get yourself hypothermic. So do you need to put a layer on, put your windbreaker on, or change into something dry and warm? Or at the other end of the scale, do you need sunscreen or seek shade, that kind of thing? So LIFT, L-I-F-T, location, issues, fuel, and temperature. And then post-run, well, you congratulate yourself on another epic mission and you make plans for the next one as soon as possible, of course. Are there any other key points we should mention, Duncan, before we wrap up?
No, that's great. I think, Joe, that using something like LIFT is a really good idea to, as we spoke about, getting that situational awareness up, putting the periscope up and just thinking about what's going on. So, yeah, perfect.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So what's next for RemoteMed?
So we've had a big year last year and hope to continue that on into next year. So we did our first adventure race. It's interesting getting a few more disciplines in there, particularly when you add water events and mountain biking, etc. So hope to be doing some more of that next year. And then the other thing is we're looking at producing some runner specific first aid kits for different environments. So as we said, mountain, tropical, etc. So we're still looking for feedback from people on that, and we will be looking at trying to get those out to the market at some stage in the next year.
That sounds great. Well, keep us posted on that.
Will
And good
do.
luck with next year's adventures. I hope to see you at Running Wales Wilson's Prom down in Victoria
Yep.
in May,
Terrific.
but
We'll be there.
not in any rescue capacity, of course. Just a
Good.
regular social encounter would be awesome.
Yep.
So I'll see you down there. But until then, all the very best. Thank you so much for today, and bye.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for the opportunity. Bye.